And I know when I was a boy, I'd heard the story. If you ever read the Dry Ridge book, history of Weaverville, there, it's the only thing it mentions is that between 1861 to 1865, there were soldiers camped in Weaverville, Confederate soldiers. There was an outbreak of illness, but they died and are buried in the old cemetery in town. Now, being the history person, I wondered, okay, who were they? Why were they here? What brought them to this spot? And nobody seemed to know. And so we spent a long time trying to figure it out, and we finally figured out who they are. In the period, particularly around 1861, you had all these troops that were volunteering for the war. And in this area, the primary area where they were converted was Camp Patton in Ashford. It was a training camp, and they would bring together all these companies arriving from these different counties, put them together, train them a little bit, and then send them out either to report down to Raleigh or to report to Tennessee, the Army of Tennessee. Well, Lieutenant Colonel David Coleman, whose property is right up here, straddle Merriman Avenue. If you know the little footbridge that crosses over Merriman Avenue, that's the Coleman property. That's where he lived. And so he knew this area very well. He'd been given authority to raise a battalion of infantry, and so troops were arriving from Clay County, Cherokee, Buncombe County, and Ashford. When they were up to about 450 men, they were told they needed to kind of move out, just start freeing up space for other troops that were arriving. But it was in the fall of 1861. They moved a little bit north of Asheville, and the account says they went into camp at the base of Gooch Mountain. And I thought, where is Gooch Mountain? Well, turns out Gooch Mountain is now called Reynolds Mountain. And if you look on some of the old topographic maps, it still says Gooch Peak on that topographic map. But they were kept around what is now present-day Beaver Lake. It was there was a huge outbreak of flu that was sweeping through the range. You got to remember that a lot of these boys grew up in small communities, hadn't been that close to each other in large numbers before the sickness would just sweep through regiments like that. Now, David knew that Salem Campground was out here, because it was the conference meeting ground for the Holston Conference, or Methodist Conference, and it had all these empty buildings, the chapel, cabins, things that were empty. He said, can I move my troops into there to ride out the winter? And he was given permission to do that. But that's where they were. From about November of 61 into about March of 1862. During that time, a certain number of them, we don't know exactly how many, died in this area and are buried in this cemetery, and we don't know exactly where they
Question, were they Confederates or Yankees?
They were Confederates.
Okay.
Yes.
Was this town split in its sympathies?
No, not Weaverville, but you go a little bit further north, you'll see like the Jupiter Cemetery.
Okay.
It is full of 2nd and 3rd North Carolina Mounted Infantry graves that are all Union.
Which is the same as this gentleman back here.
Right.
But Weaverville area, pretty much anything close to the Buncombe Turnpike is pretty strongly secessionist in that area. But the men that moved on from here became the 39th North Carolina Regiment of the Army of Tennessee, and they would fight at Chickamauga and Shiloh and places like that. But for these men, the war ended here. They never saw combat, but they still gave everything that they had to offer. You wonder, okay, who were these men in this regiment? Like I said, we don't know exactly who they were here. I can tell you a little bit about the men that were in that regiment. You always hear about the young boys that were going off to war. But the average age of 39th North Carolina Regiment was 27. And when they were taking in volunteers, I remember this, they had one that enlisted at age 50, one that enlisted at 60, one at 65, two at 68, and one at 71. And all of them remained through up to the war. So they didn't turn around and come back home. And what kind of things were they? Well, a lot of them were farmers, that's true. But they also had miners, they had a dentist, they had a cobbler, they had one sheriff, and a druggie.
Dr. Isaac Harris was, he was in that company, but he was also in a captain and Confederate stuff. They had some doctors too, probably.
Oh, yeah, had a wide variety. But like I said, we don't know the exact number that died here, but in the research we can do. Now, I'll tell you, the records of the 39th North Carolina are not very good at all. But I was able to find the names of about 7 men that I can confirm died in this same time period. So very likely they're here. And that's Private Alfred Ullman, Private Calvin Burgess, Private William J. Edwards, Private Rufus Hampton, Private Lafayette Ramsey, Private John W. Roberts, and Private Isaac Wright. So it's always my hope that every time I get a chance to do that, if there's any allowance at all for God to pull apart the veil, to separate this world from the next, that they can hear their name being read in the ground that they lie. So that's my hope.